The success or failure of your life is largely determined by the equipment you use. For instance, you wouldn't try to fight a forest fire with a squirt gun. You wouldn't try to fly across the continental United States with a hang glider. You'd use a balloon instead. You wouldn't try to play baseball without a glove. You have to use the right equipment. Fortunately, God gave you the right equipment to use in life. But the most overlooked essential equipment needed to have hope is connected relationships. And what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to lay out for you 4 relationships we all need. But before I get to that, I want to tell you why it matters, why it's important, why you should care. All of us have stress sometime or another. Anyone who wants to get rid of stress just doesn't understand it, because a stress-free life is not an option. Not having stress means you're dead. But there is good stress and there is bad stress. There is constructive stress or healthy stress, and there is destructive stress. Healthy stress requires that we have 3 elements in balance. And those 3 elements are control, challenge, and support. Everybody needs controls. Without financial controls, schedule controls, discipline controls, or focus, we end up stressed or in trouble. And if you don't believe that adequate controls are needed financially, just ask any Bertie Manoff or Sam Bankman-Fried investor. Challenges, control, and support. We need them all. Not only is control important, but challenges are essential. Anybody who isn't being challenged is probably deteriorating. Right now, I am literally working on writing about as hard as I ever have. Diane was saying the other day, she said, you're in your office all the time, because Love Your Bible is doing that. By the time I finish this, it's going to be a 700 or 800 page document that we're giving out 4, 5, 6 pages at a time on Sunday. And so it's just something, and I don't want to make mistakes because other churches are already starting to copy it, other people, and it's going out all over the place. So it's something that is very, very difficult, very challenging for me. But I was telling her the other day, I said, yeah, but I like it because it's a challenge. It's a new challenge. Challenges are healthy for you. Challenges are good for you. I mean, all of us would love to have a zero gravity life with no problems, no resistance, no challenges, and no stress. But God knows better. He knows that's not good for us. He knows we need some resistance against the band. We need some challenges, because the easier our lives are, the weaker our spiritual muscles will be, because we are not exercising our spiritual muscles very much. But the third component that forms the foundation for controls and challenges is support. Everybody needs support. Now, if you're like me, you're probably making an instant assessment to see if these 3 areas on the screen are in balance in your life. And if you're like me, you're probably discovering that your number 1 need of these 3 is almost certainly support. See, most people have enough control over their lives. Most people have enough control with their jobs and their taxes and family demands upon them and government demands upon them. And most people have enough challenges to last for the next 100 years or so. I mean, between life and marriage and kids and finances and job and health and Washington, D.C., we have enough controls. We have enough challenges. But sometimes we don't have enough support. And so we need support to face the controls and the challenges and the problems and the roadblocks that come our way. So to achieve that, we have to ask ourselves a central question. How do I build enough support in my life to help me maintain hope? How do I build enough support in my life that it balances out the control and the challenges that are present in my life? You remember last week when we were talking about hope, I asked you two questions. And that was, what drains you spiritually, and what charges you or energizes you spiritually? And those, you have to know those things in order to go forward. And now I'm asking you, how do you build enough support in your life to face the control and the challenges with energy? Getting right down to it, let me ask it this way. Are you close, really close, to anybody outside of your family? Is there anybody that you can call any time of the day or night and get support? I can't tell you how critical that is. Robert Putnam's influential book a few years ago called Bowling Alone, I read it 3 times because it was so powerful. One of the quotes from it, he talked about countless studies document the link between society and sight. People who have close friends and confidants, friendly neighbors, and supportive co-workers are less likely to experience sadness, loneliness, low self-esteem, and problems with eating and sleeping. But this was the critical paragraph. The single most common finding from a half-century's research on the correlates of life satisfaction, not only in the United States but around the world, is that happiness is best predicted by the breadth and depth of one's social connections. How many support people you have in your life and how deep that impact goes in your life is what he said, research has shown, gives you the most optimism and hope and satisfaction for life. One of the best examples of Putnam's research was Winston Churchill, the celebrated Prime Minister of Great Britain. I believe he's the greatest person of the 20th century. I do. And especially during World War II. And Churchill, if you've seen any of the movies about him or read any of the books about him, he connected deeply with all kinds of people throughout his life. He had a very solid and strong marriage. He had very strong family relationships. He had a whole lot of close friends, a large number of successful relationships, both in the government and outside of the government. On the other hand, he had terrible habits, terrible health habits. He smoked cigars all the time. He drank way too much. He had an unhealthy diet. He had a bizarre sleep habit. He never worked out. I say never worked out. Yet he lived to be 90 years old and in good health up until he died. And when his doctor asked him one time if he ever exercised, he said, I get my exercise being a pallbearer for those of my friends who believed in regular running and calisthenics. Churchill, no doubt, would have approved of another statement from Bowling Alone in Putnam's research. He said, as a rule of thumb, if you belong to no groups, but you decide to join one, you have cut your risk of dying in the next year in half. Wow. In the Bible, thank God there were no smartphones. So they actually had to talk to each other. And one of my favorite passages in the Bible is, you remember David had killed Goliath, and Saul was king. David had killed Goliath when Saul wouldn't go out there and fight him, didn't trust God enough for it. David did, and David, just a boy, we think he's 16, 17 years old, went out and killed Goliath, and because of that, the people were saying, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And Saul became very jealous of David and wanted to kill him. And David had to go on the run, and he was literally running for his life. Well, David's best friend, ironically, was Saul's own son, Jonathan. And Jonathan went to find his friend David and his own king father's enemy. And he went miles out into the wilderness to find him and encourage him to stay strong in his faith to God. And he told him, don't be afraid, my father will never find you. You are going to be the king of Israel, and I will be next to you as my father Saul is aware. So the two of them renewed their solemn pact before the Lord, and Jonathan returned home while David stayed at Horesh. Can you imagine how David's hope soared in the middle of extraordinarily difficult circumstances when his friend turned his back on his father and went out into the countryside to find him and to comfort him, encourage him, and support him? The story calls all of us to ask a critical question. Do I have someone in my life that encourages me to stay strong in the Lord when I need it most? Harold Kushner, in his book, When All You've Ever Wanted Isn't Enough, tells a beautiful little story. He said he was sitting on a beach one day, and we can imagine this down here in Southwest Florida. He was sitting on a beach one summer day watching two children, a boy and a girl, playing in the sand, and they were hard at work building an elaborate sand castle by the water's edge. We've all seen that or participated in it, with gates and towers and moats, and he said they even had internal passages. And just when they had nearly finished their project, a big wave came along and knocked it down and reduced it to just a pile of wet sand. And he said he expected the children to burst into tears, devastated by what had happened to all their hard work. But he said instead, they jumped up and laughed and screamed and held hands and ran down the beach to another area that was a little closer up to the shore and sat down and immediately started building another castle. And he said, I realized that day that they had taught me an important lesson. All the things in our life, all the complicated structures we spend so much time and energy creating are built on sand. And sooner or later, some wave will come along and knock down what we have worked so hard to build up. And when that happens, the only people who will have hope, the only people who will be able to stand and survive are those people who have someone who can grab their hand and laugh and support them. How true that is. Friendship, relationships, Christian brothers and sisters in Christ are the best investment you'll ever make. And they will always pay off. I've told the story before about the Fortune 500 CEO who stopped at a gas station while his wife went inside to pay for the gas. And he was watching as she was having an animated but very pleasant conversation. It lasted 5 to 10 minutes with the man inside. And when she got back to the car, he said, "Who were you talking to?" And she said, "He was an old boyfriend." Isn't that unbelievable? And he said, "Man, I bet you're glad you married me, a Fortune 500 CEO, instead of a service station attendant. And she paused for a moment. She said, no, that's not what I was thinking at all. I was thinking you're fortunate that I married you, or he'd be the Fortune 500 CIO. And you'd be the gas station attendant. I think that wife had probably read Proverbs 13:20, don't you? Walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble. That's as plain as the nose on your face right there. So, very quickly, you're thinking, is he ever going to get to the points? You're looking down at the outline. Well, we're halfway through, trust me. Very quickly, here are the 4 people you need in your life. You need a spirit sharpener. You need a spirit sharpener in your life. As Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. Some people just turn you on spiritually, and some people turn you off spiritually. Hang around with those who are spiritual sharpeners with you and who turn you on. A spiritual sharpener helps you develop spiritually, daring you to be not all you can be in the games arena, but in the spiritual arena. He or she will not let you settle for second best. Emerson once said, our chief want in life is someone who shall make us do what we can. This is the service of a friend. With him, we are easily great. One of the greatest football coaches of all time, for a long time the only football coach the Dallas Cowboys ever had, Tom Landry, was well known for saying, the chief job of a football coach is to make men do what they don't want to do in order to achieve what they have always wanted to achieve. Pretty good definition. You need that kind of person in your life. You need a spirit sharpener in your life, but you also need mentors and models. The poet Oliver Goldsmith said, people seldom improve when they have no other model but themselves to copy. The Apostle Paul said it this way, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ in 1 Corinthians 11:1. Paul told a more seasoned church and a more seasoned group of believers in Philippians, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. I wonder if that verse is what the great Christian leader Oswald Chambers had in mind when he wrote, the way we grow in holiness is to be around people more holy than ourselves. Sounds right to me. I don't know about you, but that's pretty easy for me to find. We need mentors and we need models. Many times I've told you about these 2 men who were the great mentors in my life. I do not know where I would be today if not for them. I am 100% certain it's not here. 100% certain of that. And anytime I still have a big decision to make, I call one or both of them. But let me bring it on a more personal level. About 3 years ago here, Laura Dallas, sitting in the back, she's one of our elders' wives, came up with an idea for a mentoring program for the women of our congregation. And she and her group that were helping her with that program just paired people, and I don't think they had any scientific method for doing it. They just did it. They just paired people. And they paired my wife, who is not 15, with a 15-year-old girl, Angel Wong. Raise your hand there, Angel. Angel, who lives with the McAfees and goes to ECS and is an international exchange student. And they had nothing in common, absolutely nothing in common. I mean, she's 15, she's not. And she speaks fluent Chinese. She struggles with good English. And at that, it's Southern English. And so we actually talked about it. When we went home that night, they were giving the assignments on a Wednesday night. We actually talked about it and said, well, boy, we hope this works. We'll pray about this working, but we're not sure this is going to work. Well, has it worked? 3 years later, they are still mentoring back and forth. Do all sorts of things they've done over these 3 years. It was supposed to be a one-year program, I think it was, or a half a year, or a one-year program. They do all sorts of things still together. They give each other gifts at all times. They're constantly texting each other. We just went to her senior night, Friday night, as a cheerleader at ECS. And when you leave to go to college this summer, I don't know what I'm going to do with her. I'm serious. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. In fact, the truth is, I'm not really sure who is mentoring whom. That's what brother-sister relationships in the church should always be. And everybody needs that in their life. You know what else we all need? Every person in here needs a heart healer. Everybody needs a heart healer. At one critical point in his friendship, Jonathan asked his dear friend to reaffirm and make a pact with him, saying, may the Lord destroy all your enemies. And Jonathan made David reaffirm his vow of friendship again, for Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. There's a heart healer for you. And they were heart healers for each other. And much of this heart healing has to do with laughter. Like the book of Proverbs says, a cheerful look brings joy to the heart. Good news makes for good health. Or for the despondent, every day brings trouble. For the happy heart, life is a continual feast. Verse 13 has always been one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Read it aloud with me, please, if you will. A glad heart makes a happy face. A broken heart... You know, we don't know that enough, so let's read it aloud a second time together, please. A glad heart makes a happy face. A broken heart crushes the spirit. That's so true. I could give you so many examples, but I'll just stick to two, okay? One a movie, another a book. Patch Adams was a 1999 movie, a true story about a compassionate but outrageous doctor who literally risked his career by defying the medical profession with his firm belief that laughter is contagious and that laughter has healing powers. How many of you saw the movie? Raise your hand. Oh, that's most of the crowd. Good. Well, then you know he's real. Dr. Patch Adams was real. He was an Arlington, Virginia physician who charges no money. No money. His income is based on donations and fees from radio and television. He carried no malpractice insurance, and he uses laughter and friendship as his chief healing devices. And the real Dr. Patch Adams, was quoted as saying, "The best therapy is being happy. All the other things doctors can do are at best aids. Health is typically defined as the absence of disease. To me, health is a happy, vibrant, exuberant life every single day of your life, and anything less than that is a certain amount of disease." Sadly, very sadly, the unbelievably talented comic and actor who played Patch Adams in a movie could never learn and apply that himself and took his own life. Adams healed a great many sick people with his philosophy. And why should we be surprised? Because the Bible says a cheerful heart is like good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Second example comes from a book. In 1964, Norman Cousins was one of the most powerful people in the country. He was the influential editor of the Saturday Evening Post, the largest magazine in the country. But he was diagnosed with a crippling and incurable degenerative disease of ankylosing spondylitis. It's very difficult for many people. And so he shunned ordinary treatment and said he was going to take control of his own treatment. And he checked himself out of the hospital, a dreary hospital room, and into a hotel room where he set up comedy movies and TV shows around the clock. And he discovered, if nothing else, if it wasn't curing his disease, it was giving him relief from the pain. His laughter was giving him relief from the pain that had kept him in agony and unable to sleep. And all of a sudden, because he'd laughed, he was able to go to sleep. And by the way, his condition kept improving. Tests were run before laughter and after laughter. And it always showed a marked improvement following his laughter sessions. He was convinced that laughter literally releases a healing potion into our bodies, and that helped him recover. And so his best-selling book, Anatomy of an Illness, which has also been a movie, is an inspiring account of his discovery. Why should we be surprised? The Bible says, a cheerful heart is like good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Now, don't get out of here and misquote me. Don't. I'm not suggesting you disregard all medical advice and attempt to laugh yourself out of every illness. I'm not recommending you throw away the Tylenol in the medicine cabinet. But I do want you to recognize the power of a cheerful heart that is provided by heart healers. We all have times of despair. We all have times of trouble and heartache and trials. We all have times of heartache when our hearts hurt. And to have people in our life who can be heart healers, such a big difference. Here's the last one we need. I tried to figure out, I spent a lot of time figuring out how I'd call this. As you might imagine. But we're a church, and we're all over the internet. So I decided to call it Rump Thumpers. How's that? Rump Thumpers. For instance, Proverbs 27:6 says, wounds from a sincere friend are better than kisses from an enemy. And that's true. You will not always like what a tail kicker has to say. A rump thumper or a tail kicker is what Oscar Wilde was describing when he said, true friends stab you in the front. Isn't that great? I love that. True friends don't stab you in the back, they stab you in the front. They're trying to come head on and tell you what is wrong with you. It's a great story told by Winston Lord in his book on Henry Kissinger, who was one of the longest serving Secretary of States in the United States history. He said Kissinger was a rump thumper of legendary proportions. And his speechwriter, Winston Lord, was constantly preparing difficult speeches on complicated topics that had worldwide implications. And he said he took one draft of a speech to Kissinger one time, and Kissinger said gruffly, "Is this the best you can do?" And he took it back to him, and he said again, "Is this the best you can do?" And that happened 7 or 8 times. And he said on the 9th draft, Lord said to Kissinger, "I have beaten my brains out. Before you even ask, I know it's the best I can do. I cannot possibly improve even one more word." And Kissinger just looked at him and said, "Okay, now I'll read it." The task of some people is to just be a tail kicker, a rump thumper. If the task of some people is to comfort the afflicted, then the task of the rump thumper is to afflict the comfortable. And everybody, whether they realize it or not, needs someone like that. They do. Someone who will challenge us to stop settling and will face the truth. So I've told this story a few times before. In 1989, I underwent severe depression, chemical depression, and I was really bad with it. And one of my best friends is a psychologist and a counselor and now a life coach as well. And I called him and I said, well, tell me what I need. If I need to go talk to a counselor, what I need. And I will never forget what he said. He said, and he's a Christian, so he doesn't cuss, but he did this one time. I'm not going to. I'm going to change the word. He said, you absolutely, 100%, the first rule is, have to go to somebody who will call you on your dung. You have to go to somebody who will call you on your dung. And I did. And she did. And it worked out. Somebody who will be a rump thumper when you need it, not just a yes man. I'm convinced one of the things that's wrong with our government and some of our presidents is they just surround themselves with yes men. And therefore nobody tells them what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. They've got backslappers everywhere around them and no rump thumpers. I'd like to be a rump thumper for some of them. One of my good friends has this gift. And I called him not too long ago expecting empathy or sympathy, which was the dumbest thing I could do. He listened. He repeated the problem, which is what you should do when you're trying to help somebody, in his words. And then he said, Randy, I want to ask you one question. How would a really good leader handle this? It was just what I needed. No empathy, no sympathy. You've got it within you. How would a really good leader do it? You see, sometimes it seems the only thing that can get your hopes up after they have been dashed is a true friend. I'll close with this story, true story. A high school student, young man who wasn't feeling well, and after a few doctor visits, the doctor delivered devastating news. He said, I'm sorry, son, but you have cancer. And that's the bad news. But the good news is that it is operable. Your long-term prognosis is excellent, but you're going to need surgery and radiation and chemotherapy, and it will be difficult, and you can't go to school for that period, and you're going to lose all your hair, and you're going to feel very sick. So the boy checked out of high school, went through surgery, completed 6 weeks of chemotherapy, was out of school for 2 months. All of his hair was gone. The day he went back to the doctor for his final visit and got a clean bill of health. And the doctor cleared him to go back to school the very next day. The whole way home, he was very quiet while his mom was driving. And his mom said, honey, you ought to be excited about this. You get to go back to school now. You get to go see your friends. He said, Mom, I'm bald. They're going to make fun of me. You don't know what the kids will do to me. She said, what if we get you a toupee? He said, Mom, that would make it worse. They'd snatch it off my head and throw it around. She said, what about if we get you a large hat? And he said, Mom, you're making everything worse. It's hard not to picture the kid's dejection. He was more depressed the further they drove from the doctor's office because every mile meant he was a step closer to going back to school the next day and seeing his fears come true. He was going to be a 15-year-old walking onto a high school campus, very bald, and he just knew going to be made fun of by every student. So he said to his mom right as they were turning into the driveway, I wonder if I should just take the rest of the year off and have them send me my homework because I really don't want to see anybody. I don't want to see my friends. I don't want to see my teachers. I don't want to see anybody. And I don't want to spend the rest of the year humiliated and embarrassed. She didn't say anything. She pulled into the driveway and they walked together into the dark house and turned on the light. And there were 30 of his friends screaming, "Surprise!" 30 high school boys were standing in his living room, and every single one of them had shaved their head. And that story got traction and got out and started a trend around the country. And it started happening, and it happened in my neighborhood just as little as 3 months ago with an elementary school child. And it happens everywhere now because they started a trend. There's power and encouragement and freedom from anxiety in friendship. Things go better when you don't do life alone. It is much easier to hold up hope when you've got someone else throwing hope and sharing hope with you. And what we all need in a culture of hopelessness are people who will be spiritual sharpeners for us. People who will be models and mentors. People who will be heart healers when we most need it. And people who, when we need it too, will be our rump thumpers to pull us back into line.